welcome everyone to Rock and Radio. We're still not starting Dive Cuts yet. That'll be next week. We'll start season 8 for Dive Cuts. If you're hoping for another episode of Dive Cuts with me, your host, Sam Snelling, you can see it at the bottom of the screen if you're watching us on YouTube. No other Matt is going to be joining me right now. It is just me, and I'm just going to talk here in a few minutes to a special guest. I went ahead and reached out to one of my favorite bracketologists, one of my favorite college football or college basketball writers on Twitter, is Rocco Miller. So Rocco and I are going to get into all the scheduling stuff that happens in college basketball. He's going to drop some knowledge on us, and he's going to tell us what he thought of Missouri's schedule. So without any further ado, let's talk to Rocco. And I would like to welcome into the podcast. We're going to turn this into an annual thing. It's Rocco Miller from Bracketeer.org. Rocco was on our podcast last year around this time. Thought he was a great guest. Rocco, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, Sam. You know, we're here on the doorstep of college football season, and depending on how you look at it, there was a couple of games early in week 0. And you know, as soon as college football starts, at least in my world, things really escalate. I'm originally from Seattle, so Washington Husky, former student, and that's my hometown team, coming off of a national championship football season last year where we lost at the very end. And now I'm looking at this Missouri team, and I'm like, man, that could be this year's Washington. So I'm really excited for Missouri football this year. But of course, we're here to talk about Missouri hoops and you know, trying to rebound from a disappointing season last year themselves.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, you know, what kind of what it is that you do, and you know, being sort of a known sort of expert in the scheduling game. Anybody that can follow you on Twitter knows that if they're following you on Twitter, they're, you know, probably going to get, you know, a healthy amount of scheduling information. For those of us who, you know, live and die by college basketball, you know, you are a must follow, along with, you know, obviously like a whole lot of other people if you're just trying to get into the nitty gritty of scheduling. So what is it that you do to sort of spell it out for the fans?
Yeah, well, my foundation is, you know, in the season, focusing on projecting who's going to make the NCAA tournament and who's going to miss the NCAA tournament, making sure that I'm using the tools and information that we've learned for decades about how selection committees operate, and that using that advantage and information to basically be able to, you know, like Joe Lunardi created it in the 90s, and he's been doing since 1996 on ESPN, and made this particular topic extremely popular to the point where I never in a million years back then would have thought I would be doing this full time and having my own website and you know, being part of different media circles. It's been a heck of a ride that I'm super passionate about and super involved with now, and really enjoy the process part of it. And you know, I don't think you can get to the answers of how brackets are built, whether that's the 36 at-large bids delivered. You know, I think about 30 of those each year are pretty obvious. Then you get down to those last 6 sometimes. Sometimes it's even just those last 2 or 3, and it really becomes like, how do you separate these teams? And you have to get to a foundation of about 17 or 18 categories. A lot of people that do bracket forecasts, you know, obviously love the popularity, love the attention, but the vast majority of them don't like getting into the 5 to 7 hour exercise that I will tediously put myself through every time I do the forecast. So hopefully that's a lot of the value that, you know, you guys have been awesome supporters over the years, and a lot of your followers have too. And that's really the difference we try to deliver with the Bracketeer website. But it goes a lot further than that, because, you know, about 7-8 years ago, I started getting contacted by several of the, let's just say, like better mid-major to lower end high major teams that really struggled to get the opportunities that you can get when you're at Kansas or at Kentucky. Of course, they can pretty much decide their entire schedule. They have the power and the resources, and everybody desires to get a chance to play against them. But a lot of teams like your St. Mary's, which is near where I live, all the way out to Birmingham, Alabama, where UAB is located, up to VCU and Dayton. And, there's so many good programs that are basketball centric, but that, historically up until about 7-8 years ago, weren't getting the opportunities. So I worked really hard at first to just try to figure out where those opportunities may lie, get to the truth of why teams won't play them, and just really start getting involved with that level. It's also just kind of my sweet spot with overall coverage during the year as I'm traveling across the country back and forth throughout the season. And that all kind of plays into the next tournament as well. So for me, it just starts with that foundation, and then scheduling is just such a huge part of that. And then, of course, Sam, just to kind of finish up the answer, we had the COVID pandemic where that's really where the scheduling thing blew up in my world, because in any given league, whether it was a low major league like the NEC or a high major league like the Big 12 or like the American or even the SEC, teams were going, they'd get a player sick, they couldn't play for a week, and that would happen like sometimes in moments notice. Sometimes they'd be warming up on the court. It's a bad memory for all of us, but this happened for a year, and all of a sudden the game would be canceled, right? And we had no fans already. We had to deal with all that. On the scheduling side of that was I was starting to get more and more phone calls from more and more new schools across all levels on, hey, Rocco, who's available in this league? Who's available in that league? We just need to play a game. We haven't played a game in 2 weeks. We had a situation up here at UC Davis in the Big West where they had 52 days without a game. So there was very extreme circumstances during that time. Some of it very well covered, some of it not covered at all. And I was really just here to say, hey, you guys should call these guys, and you should be talking to, just trying to quarterback a game from behind the scenes was, it was like a very exciting adrenaline rush. But then at the end, I kind of looked back and I saw that only about 10% of those games I put together on scratch paper actually came to light. But out of that 10%, a couple of those made it onto ESPN. I remember Houston being in the top 5 and playing Western Kentucky on ESPN2. We put that game together in 48 hours. That was a game where it was originally my idea, and I gained a ton of confidence off of that. And I was like, you know what? I can make a difference. I'm really enjoying this. And I'm also just enjoying building the relationships across the different levels of the sport, because it's improving my own perspective of the sport. And that's, sorry for the long answer, but that's really how I got here.
No, I appreciate the longer answer, mainly because there's one thing I'm readily admitting here is that I'm a mediocre question asker. I'm far better at getting into a conversation about college basketball than I am about interviewing people about it. But, I do think it is sort of interesting that you pointed to the pandemic, because I think one of the things that we did kind of learn in the pandemic is how, maybe this is a little bit more true of college football than it is college basketball, but how sort of malleable that schedule is and can be. And I really like, how college basketball does it. I like the fact that, going into an average season, and since this is a Missouri podcast, we'll use Missouri. I know that we're going to play Illinois. I know that we're going to play Kansas. I know that we're going to hit these sort of high notes in the non-conference schedule. And then, the intrigue comes from, all right, so who else are they going to, schedule? And one of the things that I kind of want to, talk to you about it is how all that sort of works from, behind the scenes, and how teams go about finding games. Before we talk specifically about Missouri, because I think you and I will probably get into a few gripes about the way that Missouri, schedules, their non-conference. But for an average, mid-major plus team, you mentioned St. Mary's, you mentioned UAB. These are teams, that I think people kind of consider a mid-major plus. Teams that are historically like quality basketball teams, and they tend to have a lot of difficulty scheduling games unless they're just willing to run the gamut and just go into other teams' arenas. Is there a way that we can kind of get past, and I know that, I know St. Mary's will occasionally kind of catch some flack for not necessarily creating the best schedule. How much is that like on a program like St. Mary's versus, some of the middle of the road programs in those higher major conferences that maybe aren't setting up those games?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of scheduling in this era specifically, because I don't think it's always been this way, is based on job security. So you will see some of the best, most kind of crazy looking schedules more often than not. And I'll start with high major examples because they're the easiest ones to point out. Whether it's Bill Self or Tom Izzo, or Nate Oates is now established, but he's been doing it even when he wasn't. So he's kind of the exception to the rule here. But now you see Bruce Pearl with the Auburn's got a huge gauntlet themselves. So if you see Oakland up in the mid major, the darling of the tournament last year, they come out this year. They've got Kansas, Illinois, Arkansas. So there's certain coaches that have been around a while. They're not worried about getting fired. They just go play whoever, and they'll build in some wins when they can, but they want to take on as many big games as they can. They have nothing to really worry about. They're not as motivated by just getting wins in the door. Whereas you'll start to, and that's now finally true at St. Mary's as well. So like in the net era, which has only been around since 2019, St. Mary's finally made the conversion to start. They've got a model where they play a lot of neutral court games. So you'll see like their MTE events on neutrals. They play a bunch of separate ones. They're even going to play Boise State in a arena up in Idaho Falls. Like they do a lot of that because they feel like their chances to win are better. But also one thing the committee really looks at closely is how you get away from home. So even if they, go down the street and play in the Golden State Warriors arena, that's still going to look better on paper than a home win. So they've gotten very strategic with that. There's a lot of good examples of that. Mississippi State in your league, and Florida now with Todd Golden in your league, they've been terrific at that. They each played 6 neutral court games last year. Both got in the tournament. I think that's really smart because you can afford to lose a couple of those. And, so I think, again, like it starts with that job security. Once you have the job security, you can schedule all you want. You can even take on a game or two more than you maybe expected in the beginning. You can stay flexible and continue strategizing. Now, if you're on the hot seat, it's almost the exact opposite. So you're really kind of just, building as big of a budget as you can, buying as many wins on paper as you can. An analytical win on paper is anything above 7. At least that's in football, but I think in basketball, maybe above 10. So again, I think you know where I'm getting at there. If they can go to their AD and say, hey, we missed the tournament, but we won 20 games, depending on the AD, if they're basketball centric or not, you might be able to get an extension on your contract with that kind of mantra. Again, it's not something I think the majority of educated basketball fans would agree with. It's not something that I think ultimately the fans really want. They want to get to the NCAA tournament, especially if you're Power 5. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of these coaches are just trying to figure out a way to survive for a couple more years. And everything's resetting in this era, right? So next year's portal is another opportunity to either go from a top 10 team or you can be a top 100 team. Like that's kind of what happened with Seton Hall when they ran out of NIL budget this year. So there is just so many different examples, but all of that is a huge factor. And there's really not too big of a middle grade, not much of a middle class in there, I guess you could say. So that's why you see such a big difference.
Well, I think kind of pointing out like the differences of this era, is something that I'm kind of curious about because I do see, especially when you consider like how expensive it's gotten for high major, conference football teams, how much they're needing to invest just to remain competitive, and how much of that is going to bleed into NIL budgets, how much it's going to bleed into, a university's willingness to pay a buyout. Especially when, let's just say that, Minnesota wants to fire Ben Johnson, right? It's very possible at the end of this year that they decide that they want to do that. I don't know the exact contract details, but with that comes the buyout. Is the school not just going to say like, all right, well, it's just as expensive for us to go pay for a new coach, invest that into NIL. Let's actually, put some money into NIL. We won't fire you, because you've shown in the past that you can be at least decent when you have an okay team. Let's invest in the team. Let's go out. Let's create a better schedule. Let's get fans invested in coming back into the arena. I mean, do you think we're going to see that more, or is it still just going to kind of come down to if you made the tournament or not?
Yeah, it goes both ways because his situation's a little unique. He's going into the fourth year of his deal now, but they did show progress last year, right? Like I thought, significant progress getting into the top 8 in the standings. I think they finished as the 8th place team. Of course, it wasn't a tournament resume, but they kept improving throughout the year. The gamblers will tell you that they had one of the best against the spread records, which shows good coaching. They're maximizing every single night what they have, at least according to Vegas. So they're an interesting case study, I would say, because that's one where you would get to the end of the year and maybe they missed the tournament again, right? But they did show good signs. That the Big Ten and the SEC are very similar in the fact that they are both super conferences now. Of course, Big Ten has 18 teams to the SEC 16, but there are no teams in like Torvik's projection right now below 74 in either league. So if everybody's a top 75 team, somebody's got to get 17th, 16th, 18th in that Big Ten conference. And is it logical to fire those guys no matter what? I don't know. Like we'll find out, but you could see like at that point it's more specific to the institution and their donors and the people that really have juice on those decisions. A lot of times they can influence the AD one way or another to make a change. The other big part of it, as you know, is who's available to go higher. So if they've got somebody lined up that they just can't pass up, that could change things. So in the coaching thing, it's not always that straightforward. Now, you do have situations like we did last year with Northwestern and NC State, I think are great examples where they were both prepared to move on if they missed the tournament. Both those coaches end up getting in and they're still there. So it's a fascinating world because you really do have to pay attention closely to each program. It's not always just, an assumption that you can bank on. There's always in different internal politics. As you mentioned, the buyout is such a big factor because certain people have bigger buyouts, which is why, like where I'm from at Washington, Mike Hopkins only made one tournament, but he was able to hang on for 7 years. Because of that, you saw Jared Haas at Stanford last forever with no tournaments. And a lot of that was buyout related as well. And also just, in Stanford's case, a lack of pressure to get rid of him. So they just kept moving forward with him.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Missouri. As the Tigers, we're recording this Tuesday, August 27th. I think this is probably not going to get into our listeners' ears until the weekend. There's a little football game on Thursday, so
there we go.
I think everybody's attention is going to be on that. We'll give them a couple days to relish in the fact that college football is back. But last week, Missouri did release their entire schedule. The SEC released their conference schedule. Not everybody in the league released their non-conference schedule or has released their non-conference schedule, but Missouri did. And there's not a lot that sort of came out of it that we didn't already know. We knew that they were going to play a home game in the ACC Challenge. They drew California. We knew that they were going to be welcoming in, KU back to Columbia. And as always, the bragging rights game against Illinois. And then outside of that, they did have a multi-year contract with Memphis. That game got scheduled, so they're making a road trip to Memphis. They were, speaking of Minnesota, they were expecting to complete a 2-year deal with Minnesota and bring Minnesota in. That game ended up not getting scheduled. And what did end up getting scheduled was a whole lot of not great, non-conference schedule fodder for, and I don't want to disrespect, a lot of these. Eastern Washington is certainly turning over with Dan Munson. Yeah. Pacific. I'm actually a huge fan. They hired Coach Smart. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it just I love a really exciting hire like that. A guy who's won big and a place that is, off the radar. For anybody who doesn't know, he's like the winningest coach ever in Canadian, collegiate basketball history. It's like, and his win percentage blows any American coach out of the water. This is something to consider. Hopefully, you can kind of get Pacific turned around. I think that would be helpful for the West Coast Conference. But it's Lindenwood again. Missouri has played Lindenwood in the past. Arkansas Pine Bluff, Eastern Washington should probably not be very good. Mississippi Valley State is back on. It is a little bit of a disappointing schedule, especially when you have this like run of like 10 home games in a row. Um, what was your initial take really when you saw like what Missouri had lined up?
Well, I mean, it looks similar to what they did in the past to me, and maybe even a step down, just depending on how you look at it. I mean, really, what their non-conference schedule boils down to is 4 games. Unless there's a big surprise with like a Pacific, perhaps a Jacksonville State, who I have tons of respect for Ray Harper there, and then Eastern, eventually Howard's perhaps the favorite actually in the MEAC, but still probably a quad 4 game. So by and large, it's a 4-game non-conference, and Cal's the kind of team like very exciting around here. Glad they're back on the rise. Glad that they're reinvesting in basketball. Madsen's going to do a great job, but you play Cal at home, you got to win that game, period.
Yeah.
And so then you get past that and you got a 3-game non-conference. And I think any of those 3 all bode well to get into quad 1, given the fact that Illinois is on a neutral. Memphis is a road game. That should definitely be quad 1. And of course, Kansas. So again, you want to get at least one of those 3. And if you can get 2 of those 3, it might all work out in the end, right? But if you go 0 for 3 in those 3, it might be a pretty meaningless other games that you want, even though it's a nice win percentage. And the reason I say that is one of the things the selection committee will quite often do, and I've had a couple different members say it to me directly, is they're just going to ignore everything you do in quad 4 unless you lose a game. So all you can do with all these other games, assuming the majority of them are quad 4, certainly 5 are very, very far into quad 4 when you look at LIU, Alabama State, Lindenwood, Pine Bluff, and Mississippi Valley State. Those are all at the very bottom of D1 for the most part. And so really no hope of any of those 5 getting out of quad 4. So those are just going to be largely ignored. And one of the things that, I thought kept certainly Seton Hall and St. John's out of the tournament, for example, was once you took that quad 4 away, they both had losing records. And that's a pretty easy de facto reason to leave a team out. And so that just means outside of those 3, big time games we mentioned, if Cal doesn't get into quad 1, which since they're a home game, that requires them to be top 30. I think we'd agree they're pretty unlikely to be a top 30 team. That puts a ton of pressure on those 3 games, because then everything you do in SEC play is going to be what makes or breaks your resume. So it really just it squeezes your schedule all into conference games. And the conference is pretty darn good, and Missouri's projected. And again, like I like a lot of the moves Missouri made. I thought they brought in 4 players, all from winning programs. That's a really good formula typically to get out of the cellar and into a better spot. It's very similar to what South Carolina did last offseason. And we saw the jump they took. So again, I'm certainly not writing off Missouri. I think there's plenty of reasons to be excited, but it's a darn good league. It's a very deep league. And right now they're projected 14th out of 16th with just using an unbiased, Torvik tool there. So, it just puts the pressure on almost everything happening in league play. And then even then, you can beat tournament level teams in league play at home. It's not going to be enough to get you in. You got to go win road games in the league against tournament level teams. It's just it's a lot of weight to put on your guys, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think as a Missouri, we study Missouri and the rest of the league, pretty extensively.
Yep.
And I do think that some of the initial number releases are going to be underestimating the Tigers. I don't think they're going to be 14 and a 16.
Right.
I don't think they're a top 6 team. But I do think they're at least in that middle bubble area. And so if we're talking about shifting, getting off what happened last year and getting back into the NCAA tournament, let's put Rocco in charge of Missouri's schedule, for this year instead of the existing coaching staff. what are these kinds of games that obviously you want to maybe cut down on several of like the quad four games. I'm not necessarily anti quad four. I do know that those teams need to schedule. They need to schedule high majors. They need to get budget. And I'm also a proponent of a softer entry into your into your non-conference schedule. I like the idea of just sort of being able to kind of work your way into the season. And not necessarily jump right into a super hard game, I say, as they're going to make a road trip to Memphis. But how would you work the schedule in a way that, for a program like Missouri, who's hoping to be in the NCAA tournament again, and set themselves up for an at-large bid, come next March?
I mean, I think I would have at least added two more what I call strategic games, which again are games that you can lose, but at the same time, even if you go and play those games, there's events not too far away happening, whether it's down in Oklahoma City or up in Moline, Illinois. We've got a day full of games there. There's stuff going on in Milwaukee this year on a certain Sunday. There's a lot of places they could play. There's events in Texas, and you could play. If you're a Missouri Tiger team out of the SEC, good teams are dying to play you. And it doesn't really hurt if you play two of them and you go 1-1, then it's actually it's better than not playing them at all. So in my opinion, you add that to what's already 3 to 4 strategic games. If you want to count Cal or not, you can get that number at least up to 6. I think you need to have at least 6. So I do talk with the Florida staff quite extensively about this, which is how they ended up with, they like having the 6 neutrals and perhaps 1 true road game if they need it, but they can actually get away without a true road game. Seems to be a good formula because it gets the committee enough data. They trust their team to be good enough to show themselves. And then, of course, if you hit a home run and you go 5-1 in those games or 6-0, you're going to go from not only in, but you're going to shoot way up the seed list with that kind of proof in the pudding. I think the hard part with a Missouri level schedule is, unless you run the table in those 3 big games, which is extremely hard to do, but doable. Illinois is in St. Louis and Memphis is opening night. Anything can happen in opening night. Kansas at home. So I'm not saying it's impossible. They can certainly do it. And I agree with you. They should definitely be better than 14th. It's just, we don't know that when we're scheduling. So they're just going to put a ton of pressure on themselves to make some of those other wins that they could have had in non-conference have to happen now in league. And I just think, you don't know when injuries are going to happen. You want to give yourself opportunities throughout the season because the season could either start cold or start hot. And, that way you're balanced.
Yeah. So when you talk about like those kind of opportunity games, neutral site, are those typically like you're talking about against other high majors? You're talking about, like mid-major plus, what sort of like home games could, somebody schedule that would at least make it more intriguing? Because I do think there is some value to scheduling home games and trying to kind of bring in the gate.
I agree. Yeah. And I mean, it's a big part of the game. I think it's just the way the world we're living in now with the quad system and the way the net shakes out, you have to get a top 30 home game for it to be in quad 1, right? So the Kansas one makes all the sense in the world. Keep that going forever if you're Mizzou.
Right.
Nothing to lose, really. Obviously, you don't want to lose by 30 plus, but otherwise, just play that game, and all your other numbers are going to come up just from playing it. But I think when it comes to neutral court games, you get all the way up to the top 50. You get just a bigger group of teams you can select from. You can play a team like a St. Mary's. You can aim for a Power 5. You can go, it just makes it a little easier for you to go somewhere else, play a game. You don't have to play somebody in their backyard. You don't have to go play TCU in Dickey's Arena. You could go play, Florida State in Dickey's Arena. See how that goes. Obviously, Dennis Gates isn't going to do that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing kind of random matchups up, but that's why those games come together, because those teams need to add those to the resume. They also want to feel good that they have a chance to win. The hardest part about home and homes is just for the fans is nobody ever wants to start on the road. So it's very rare where, I have a lot of schools at all levels that want to do home and homes on certain dates. And I'd say 90% of the inventory that comes in is all teams that want to start a home and home series at home. And that's pretty obvious, right? Because in this era, anything can happen next year. A new coach could get hired. That new coach doesn't want to come back and return the game. They'll either pay $50,000 or $100,000 and not play it. There's all sorts of finagling and scheduling. In fact, I would say every year I've been involved, it's gotten crazier and crazier. So it's not going the other direction. So I feel like that's also contributed to the problem of not getting as many good home games, but it is refreshing to see some of those high level ones. Like you have one with Kansas doing with North Carolina. That's coming soon. Arizona, Duke. Like the sport really needs that. And, if they can redo the team sheets or some of the quad system in certain ways, maybe we could see more. But the way things are set up today, that's just quite honestly not going to happen as often as we want.
Yeah, I don't. I think you're going to get a lot of agreement from me on like the quad system. I just don't necessarily understand the difference between beating 50 and beating 51.
Right.
It's just like that's not how analytics work.
Exactly.
Like some kind of grading.
Exactly. And the thing I appreciate about the actual committee, for the most part, I mean, the members change every year, but they seem to keep to the foundation, at least for the sake of getting the right 36 correct, which is really all I can hope for. If they're going to screw up the seeds somehow, and that's fine. That always happens. But on the getting the right 30, you don't want to rob a team if they don't deserve to be there. And one of the key metrics they look at that doesn't get discussed nearly enough, I try to bring it up on the shows I'm on, is how did you do against teams that are actually in the field? So record against the field is such a huge part of it. You look at Oklahoma last year, they're going to be part of the SEC this year. They were the first team out. Well, one of the easiest things you can look at with Oklahoma is, and I don't know if this was their final record, but right in that final week I'm looking at my spreadsheet from last year, they were 2-11 in those games. So it's like, do you really belong in the tournament if you had 13 at bats and you only got 2 hits? It's like, at that point, it doesn't even really matter if they were both top 5 wins. And they did have a home win over Houston, actually, but you can easily dismiss it when you had that many chances and only won twice. So I'm really glad that they still look at stuff like that. I individually, if you beat a tournament team, I individually type out the team name. So it's very clear to me when I'm comparing, I'm just looking at last year, if I'm comparing Virginia to St. John's, I can tell you exactly why Virginia was selected over St. John's. And I know that was unpopular, but it ended up being correct because in the chances they had against tournament level teams, they did more than St. John's. So some of that stuff's easy to explain. Unfortunately, maybe I should train the committee people on how to do the interviews because they actually do make a lot of good decisions. They just don't know how to explain them very well. That's been a problem.
Yeah. So pivoting a little bit away from Missouri specifically, I do kind of want to talk about the SEC more broadly. Last year we did spend a good amount of time sort of lauding Nate Oates on his ability to schedule difficult. Bruce Pearl is a guy who's kind of taken a step forward, and I think this year specifically being willing to kind of go, obviously, and if Duke wants to host you for a game, that's a really sort of easy game to take because you're not going to get punished if you lose, and if you go win, it's a huge win. But who are some of the teams maybe in the middle of the pack who you think have really helped themselves with scheduling, setting themselves up for if they can, obviously everybody has to take care of business, you have to win the games, but set themselves up with a really good schedule.
Yeah, I agree with you. So Alabama, Auburn kind of in their own category as the top 2 in terms of aggression, and certainly they can afford to start like 3-4. Like Nate Oates has started 3-4 before and still got a 6 seed.
Well, they lost 10 games last year, right? So
right.
Would it end up being 11?
I think they did. Yeah, you're right. And they still squeezed into the 4 line. They had unbelievable metrics, and as you know, Sam, like when it comes to seeding, that's kind of the primary focus, and that got them into the that top 16. As we see the reveal in February now, they ended up staying in there as the final bracket came out. But the team I have to start with is Mississippi State. I just think you could look at their final schedule when it comes out. Might not be one particular game that blows your mind, but I think what they did for the committee was extremely brilliant. They're going to play both at Memphis and SMU, road games, but manageable, both not too big a travel trips for them. And then outside of that, they've got a slew of other games all over the place. So they're going to play their tournament in Glendale, Arizona. They get UNLV in the first round, Northwestern or Butler in the championship. Mississippi State's the best team in that event on paper, so a really good chance to go win that championship. And if they lose to any of those teams, it's really not that bad of a loss. So I just kind of love the hedge there with that event that they're in. They're going to play a loaded McNeese team. I assume McNeese can stay. They finished in the 50s, I believe, last year in net, maybe in the 60s after they got killed by Gonzaga. But going into the tournament, they're in the 50s. And they should be in the same realm of area. So either a quad 1 game against McNeese in Tupelo, Mississippi, or a high quad 2 game. Then you've got a game against Utah near Memphis, where they'll certainly be much closer to home than Utah is. Really good chance to win that game against a Power 5 team. And again, so I've just listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 games. None of them are at home. All of them, they're kind of in maybe a 60-40 position, a 55-45 position to win. And if they lose a couple, they're fine. Then they got another one that might not mean much in the end. It could still be quad 4, but they're going to play in their Jackson game against Central Michigan. That's a team that's been at the bottom of the MAC, but they've got a bunch of new players. Who knows? That could sneak into Q3 at some point because of the fact they played it on a neutral. So they only have 5 home games right now. They'll add a 6th to finish. And even out of the home games, they've got Pittsburgh at home in the ACC SEC Challenge. So the reason I bring them up is because you can use this exact program with a similar model last year safely in the tournament as a 9 seed, despite going 5-10 against tournament level competition. So my whole point in scheduling this way is you have so much more room for error. They lost last year at home to Southern University. They also lost to a Georgia Tech team that was in the 140s or worse, I think, in net. And they were able to overcome that because they had all this other evidence. And a bunch of these weird neutral games got into quad 3, so the committee had to pay attention to them. So again, once you kind of know how to go about it, like they've mastered here, I think it just allows so much more room for error, and you can only escalate if you win enough of them. So that's the team I think I'm most impressed by. But I also think, Florida, very similar, as I've already mentioned them. I think Ole Miss actually did. Obviously, they had a really poor schedule last year. It's not all that much greater this year, but the fact that they're going to go to Memphis, they're going to go to Louisville. They picked up a couple neutral court games. Again, these are not the crazy sexiest things in the world, but just going down to Biloxi and playing Southern Miss and going up to that Memphis area and playing Colorado State on top of a tournament that has BYU, Purdue, and NC State. They go from just maybe having 3 or 4 strategic games to now having a minimum of 6. And they should win all their home games. They don't really have a big home game. So I'm good with what Ole Miss did based on that. I think even Vanderbilt, who's brand new to the league with Coach Byington, a lot of upside on that roster, kind of a sneaky team. They've started a home and home with Cal. They get to go to Virginia Tech for Virginia Tech that's a little bit down on paper this year for the challenge game. A Charleston Classic field that's got some good names in it, but it's very manageable. They open with Nevada, Seton Hall or VCU in the second game, and then perhaps Miami, Oklahoma State, FAU, Drake in the championship. Vandy could win that tournament, in my opinion. And then they get, they'll start a series with TCU in Dickies Arena, but even so, TCU doesn't always pack the house for those types of games. So, even Vandy, just that was 6-7 neutral or strategic games for them. So yeah, like in general, I think a lot of the conference, the majority, I would say led by Mississippi State, did good enough to where they've got enough chances in their non-conference to get in. I think on the bottom end, the only teams that really perhaps put themselves behind the ball and really squeeze themselves. SEC, obviously, Mizzou's in that group, but I would say the two newcomers, Texas and Oklahoma. Now, you might say Texas has these big 4 or 5 games, and that's true. But the fact that they're playing 7 or more games against, and I think I had a tweet about this, against 330 plus, I think it's maybe even 8, that's just really dragged down the non-conference strength of schedule. And if they go 1-4 in those other 5 or 2-3, I mean, that's a team that really does not want to be on the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma, I would say, stepped it up a little bit from last year, trying to learn their lesson from getting left out. But the reality is Porter Moser is probably still on the hot seat this year, and the schedule reflects that.
Yeah, I think, just looking at the rosters, it looks like there's not a whole lot of draw for Moser to be able to, bring in the kind of players he's going to need to compete. I will say you are joined by the Rock and Brain Trust in liking what Vanderbilt has kind of going into the season.
Yeah,
I think they're, like me and Matt Harris and Matt Watkins all sort of agree that we think Vandy's going to be a sneaky good team. And yeah, I didn't quite look at Texas's schedule.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, Houston Christian, Chicago State, Mississippi Valley State, Delaware State, Arkansas Pine Bluff. I don't know how good New Orleans is going to be, but I can't imagine very. Northwestern State,
New Orleans had a change. They actually still have to fill 3 or 4 spots at my last check.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games they're favored by 28 points or more.
Yeah, I mean it's I hate to pick on Iowa State, but it's kind of that model. And obviously, if Texas, I know they have 4 or 5 big games in there. If they go 4-1 in those, they'll be okay. But it's just frustrating because I just feel like those are uninteresting games for pretty much everybody. Even, the fact that somebody on a highlight show has to show highlights from that is painful. And, I think, it's just the sport.
You get some good dunks,
Right. But yeah, that's where the problem needs to be addressed is when a team with one of the biggest budgets like Texas does, they're basically going on to Torvik in the beginning of April and saying, okay, who's at the very bottom of D1 heading into next year? And that's pretty much all the teams they called to fill those 8 spots. And they did pretty darn good because they had the money to do it. I'll tell you, in scheduling, the smartest teams out there are the ones at the bottom because they know they can keep driving up the price. That's why, you saw Sacred Heart get bought for $140,000 to play UConn. They're very good at kind of playing the game and getting the highest bidder, and Texas had the money to do that.
Yeah. The only other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, because you're talking about strategic games, and it is, I think as a college basketball fan who, sort of, I have a rooting interest. I don't enjoy neutral site games or like watching neutral site games. It's the vibe, especially in, November and December when there's, most everybody's still paying attention to college football.
Yeah.
Even though like I understand what you're saying as far as the value and how they bring value to scheduling, it's still like I still want games like in home arenas, even if it's like, the team that I root for going into a tough place to play and losing. I would rather watch that game than watch them like, go to Orlando and play at Walt Disney or something.
Yeah, and I can't argue with that at all. Like I agree from a watchability standpoint as a fan. Like there's no way I could argue with that. And I also go to a lot of these neutral games because a lot of them I'm helping with the planning. And if it's a game for teams that are potentially going to be in the bubble later in the season, of course I'm going to be there. That's really kind of my focus anyway. But yeah, to your point, like a lot of those games, there's really nobody there. I know how big they are. The coaches and hopefully the players know how big they are. But yeah, sometimes, and a lot of them happen in November or early December, right? So they're still trying to figure out their team. There's just kind of a weird vibe across the board because you're not getting these two teams at their peak. And any team that maybe be coming back with a veteran group certainly has an edge in those types of games. But Yeah, I definitely agree. It's just it's an unfortunate byproduct of the system that we're in right now, and I think all of this should be on the table for discussion on how to make it better. Like, because there needs to be a place where it's okay for Missouri to go play at Bradley or South Carolina to go play at Charleston. You know, those types of games are huge for those schools. It shouldn't be a risk for them to go there and feel like if they lose, the whole world's going to fall apart. But that's how the administration feels in a lot of these places. I'm not saying that your specific school or not, but they won't even consider it. One of the only people that was able to get that done on a regular basis was a guy like Roy Williams at North Carolina. Mm-hmm. He would always play those. You know, he opened up the new Elon Arena. He opened up the Wofford Arena. One year he went to Northern Iowa. You know, so that stuff is what makes the sport incredible. And then also giving those same higher level mid-major plus, as you say, mm-hmm. You know, getting them into your own arena. Because right now, like Missouri probably wouldn't even play St. Mary's at home. And that's not good for the sport. That'd be exciting for Missouri fans to go see. And it's not just Missouri. There's probably half the high majors, maybe even 3/4 of the high majors that would all say no to a team like St. Mary's or a UAB or a VCU or Dayton or, you know, what have you. So right. The only reason Florida Atlantic was able to pull it off last year is because so many people put them in their top 20 that it didn't feel as risky for a team like Illinois to go play them or Arizona, et cetera. But that's a very big anomaly in this era.
I agree with you. Maybe what we should do, Rocco, is we'll just appoint ourselves the czars of college basketball, and we'll just go through and just do all the scheduling for everybody. So like, you don't have your own interests into it. Like, we're going to do it from a neutral's perspective. We're going to do what's best for the sport. That'd be a wild thing, right?
It would be. And I can't wait for that day. I can't wait for our phone call, Sam. I have so many ideas. You know, one of the things I really would love to do if I was ever able, you know, to be a part of that, if that change is ever possible, is to mandatory put 2 non-conferences games in February. Because all this non-conference data is clearly important to the committee, but it all happens in the first 6 weeks of the year. Then we're all moving on to league games. I want to see some late season non-conference games that matter. I think the only way you can do that is building an NIL level showcase. You have to play it in Vegas or somewhere. Again, I don't want to create more neutral games, but just the opportunity to square some teams up that would otherwise never play each other. And even if we have to play it at the home team of the higher seed, I mean, that would be better than nothing. We just need some sort of weekend in February where everybody can play twice in non-conference. And I would gladly trade that for 2 league games in early December. But
yeah, hey, it wasn't that long ago that was, you know, regular. I remember, you know, Norm Stewart would just, you know, occasionally, like, you'd just have like Notre Dame just thrown into the middle of the schedule, and just like, you know, things like that is, you know, I agree with you. It would be just even looking last year, like how exciting the Kentucky Gonzaga game was.
It was huge. It was like, huge. It changed Gonzaga's season.
Yeah, and that was the end of January, right? So it's just like, what, you know, what a great time.
Mid-February, yeah.
Was it that late? Mm-hmm. Well, it also reminds me of, like, you know, the SEC. Who did they used to play?
Big 12 Challenge.
Big 12, right? Yeah, right in the middle of the season was, you know, or middle of the conference.
They should never have changed that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, they should have carried that over with the ACC. I'm not sure why that didn't get carried over. We will have Duke, Illinois on February 22nd this year, but I think that's the only February non-conference game, and you know that will still be good. It's just it'd be better if we had a bubble team from each conference. I don't think those teams will be on the bowl.
Yeah, they used to do the bracket buster thing that was more mid-majors. Like, let's just do it
beautiful.
For every conference. Yeah,
that's right.
Every conference, yeah.
And if you could make it, you know, and my idea behind that would be to make it more of a scouting combine, so like everybody would be motivated to play their best. Not that they wouldn't be otherwise, but it would put more reason for a team like Duke or Arizona or whatever big name you want to use, and have to play a UNC Greensboro who might be a 25-win SoCon team. You know, that's what if the sport had that, it'd be incredible, because then a team from a league like that, if they were the best team in that league, would have a legitimate case to be selected. Like in Indiana State last year, really needed that opportunity didn't exist. There's always and that's the world I live in. Like I would love to see half the teams that got selected last year play Princeton. I think Princeton could beat probably 8 to 10 of them. I mean, sorry if that's still a sore subject, but they're an incredible program. They're an incredible program, and there's no shame in losing to them. And I thought they got completely overlooked last year as an at-large candidate.
Yeah. No, I think we're on the page on a lot of that stuff, Rocco. So I do appreciate you coming on. I'm going to wrap this up because I know we've gone about 20 minutes past what I hope to keep you, but it tends to happen when people get me talking about hoops. So before we get out of here, why don't you go ahead and just tell everybody where they can find your stuff. While you're doing that, I'm going to try to bring up your website.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. You can find me at Rocco Miller 8 on X/Twitter. That's where I'll be consistently 365 days a year updating you on what's going on in college basketball. Obviously, getting through a big chunk of scheduling season lasts from April to September now. It's kind of insane. But on my website, bracketeer.org, you can go on there. You'll see the SEC page under the tab that says non-conference schedules. We're actually still working on that. We're trying to roll out as many leagues as we can. So far, we've got the top 7 leagues listed. So if you're curious what Wichita State's doing this year, for example, you can go see them as well. And by the end of September, hopefully we'll have pretty much all of college basketball listed on bracketeer.org. And then you can continue to use that website as a resource. In October, I always do a very large, in-depth, opinionated preseason preview. And then that's the last time you ever hear my opinion, because everything once the games start is always based on data and what I think the committee is going to do.
Nice. And where can people follow you on Twitter?
That's Rocco Miller 8, the number 8.
Thank you, sir. I'll probably make you do this again because it was a lot of fun. But I appreciate you coming on, sharing the knowledge, and yeah, if you're on for anybody that's still on X, I think that's what we call it, X now. On Twitter, you can give Rocco a follow. Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. It's a pleasure. You guys do great work. Thank you.
And once again, I'd like to say thank you to Rocco Miller. Really terrific follow on Twitter. If you're still on the tweetosphere, head over to his website, bracketeer.org, bookmark it, go there often, especially in the off season when you can kind of get up-to-date information on what Missouri's doing with their schedule. We appreciate Rocco taking the time to sort of talk to us, and we'll try to do this again. I really think that maybe he and I will form a committee and take over college basketball scheduling and just fix it and make it better for everybody. So next week we'll be back with dive cuts. Some form of a Matt will be with me. And until then, thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Dear Rock M Plus listeners, readers, and subscribers, we are thrilled to announce our first ever digital Mizzou football review magazine. Inspired by the iconic newsstand staples like Athlon, Phil Steele, and Street & Smith, our team has created a PDF file jam-packed full of content for you to learn about the most anticipated Missouri football season maybe in history. Checking in at about 100 pages, we have in-depth previews of all 12 opponents, analysis of each position group, profiles of newcomers, exclusive photographs, features like a retrospective on the 2014 team, the evolution of Faurot Field, Luther Burden's place in Mizzou history, and more. We also have an analytics Q&A with Bill Connolly of ESPN, the founder of Rock M. We also have college football preview content and much more. This digital magazine is available now. It is $15 for purchase, with discounts available for premium Rock M Plus subscribers based on your membership tier. $10 for monthly members, $5 if you have an annual membership. Now is the time to become a member to secure your discount on this one-of-a-kind product today. We know that you're going to love this magazine, and we can't wait to have it on your devices. MIZ.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rocco and Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rocco and Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rocco and Radio coming to you soon.